Welcome back to the TPS podcast. TPS stands for trillions per second, named after the book. Today we'll do a deep dive on TPS Protocol Zero. Let's explore this monumental side quest by the Centaur team and dive right in.
It is incredibly good to be back in the studio for this. I just have to say, the sheer velocity of the momentum we are tracking right now with this project is, it's just staggering. It feels like every time we sit down, the entire architecture has evolved again.
Staggering is honestly the only word for it. Just to ground everyone tuning in, let's establish our exact timeline because the context here is everything.
Right, context is crucial right now.
Yeah. So today is Tuesday, March 10th, 2026. And the massive document we have sitting on the desk in front of us, TPS Devlog 024, it dropped literally yesterday, Monday, March 9th.
Hot off the presses.
Exactly. And before we get into the heavy lifting of this document, I want to take just a moment to recap the absolute whiplash of the past few weeks. Because if you have been following this deep dive series with us, you know we have been on a complete roller coaster with the Centaur development team.
It is an understatement to call it a roller coaster, really. We have tracked this project through multiple profound paradigm shifts in a highly compressed window of time. The sprint cycles they're running are almost superhuman at this point.
They really are. Let's just review what just happened. Just a few weeks ago, we were surviving that massive Silicon Sutra detour. Remember that?
Oh, how could I forget? The theoretical quad-core kernel.
Right. The author, C4Chaos, and his AI coprocessors completely paused the main manual. They went down this massive rabbit hole to formulate a framework to solve AI alignment using the thermodynamic baseline of consciousness. We spent hours dissecting that.
We did, and it was a necessary detour.
It was, but then, right after they finally resolved that and got back on track, we tracked the author suffering a literal biological hardware crash. He caught a severe virus that laid him out flat, completely bedridden, just days ago.
Which, paradoxically, was the exact catalyst needed for the next breakthrough.
Yeah, the becoming fired devlog.
Precisely. That physical crash serendipitously led to that realization. It forced the team to figure out how to debug the biochassis while offline, while the system is under extreme duress and unable to run standard operational protocols.
The ultimate stress test of the framework. And then, coming out of that illness, we witnessed what they called the ruthless partitioning of the fluff.
Yes, taking a machete to the project.
Exactly. They just stripped away all the academic noise, all the lingering spiritual bypassing, all the comfortable philosophical padding, all of it just gone. Just to get back to the absolute bare metal code of human consciousness. It has been a wild, unpredictable ride, but it's all been leading right here.
And all of that context, the AI alignment detour, the physical system crash, the ruthless editing, all of it is absolutely crucial for understanding the mission of today's deep dive.
Which brings us to TPS0.
Yes, we are looking at a document titled TPS Protocol Zero, or TPS0. The developers have officially canonized this document as the final chapter in the TPS book.
Chapter 15, right.
Correct. It will be permanently slotted in as Chapter 15, Side Quest 6. And with this final architectural piece locked into place, the Centaur team is officially pivoting. They are preparing to ship the beta version of the entire TPS project.
Which brings us to why this specific update is so monumental for you, the person listening to this right now. Because we all have this problem. If you've ever felt like modern cognitive psychology, ancient Greek philosophy, and the world's various spiritual traditions are all speaking entirely different, completely incompatible languages, this deep dive is your universal translator. We're going to look at the ultimate translation layer for the human mind.
Precisely. Let us look at the core thesis of Devlog 24. The devlog doesn't just start with an introduction, it opens with a manifesto.
It really does lay down the law.
It declares in no uncertain terms that TPS0 is designed to be the flagship systemic theory of everything and STO within the TPS project. Its primary driving goal is to systematically, ruthlessly strip away the poetic, the religious, and the legacy terminology that has obscured the world's wisdom traditions for millennia.
And this is where the TPS framework just fundamentally differentiates itself from every other mindfulness app or self-help book or spiritual movement out there. It doesn't want you to join a religion.
No, not
right. It doesn't want you to learn ancient Pali or Sanskrit or Tibetan just to figure out why you feel an overwhelming sense of anxiety on a random Tuesday afternoon. It wants to give you the raw, executable code of your own mind.
What's fascinating here is how the devlog establishes this foundational layer. It explicitly states that TPS Protocol Zero serves as a universal interface for contemplative technology, and it achieves this by taking the master lexicon, specifically version 4.1, which they've been refining for months, and installing it as a foundational BIOS.
Okay, a BIOS. Let's make sure we define that clearly for everyone because we are going to be using a lot of technical analogies today, and I want to make sure we don't lose anyone in the jargon. Calling it a BIOS is a brilliant, highly specific choice of terminology by the Centaur team.
In computing, the BIOS, which stands for Basic Input-Output System, is the core firmware used to perform hardware initialization during the booting process. It is the very first code run by a computer when it is powered on.
Right before Windows or Mac OS even loads.
Exactly. It sits entirely below the operating system. You never interact with the BIOS when you're typing a document or browsing the web, but without it, your hardware doesn't even know it's a computer.
So by establishing the master lexicon as the BIOS, TPS0 is saying that before you run any philosophical operating system, whether that's the software of Buddhism, the software of Stoicism, or the software of modern cognitive behavioral therapy, you must first initialize your biological hardware with a standardized, objective, non-sectarian language.
And according to the devlog, once you have that BIOS securely in place, you can engineer what they call a standardized API deployment pipeline.
Yes, an application programming interface.
Right. In software, an API allows two entirely different programs to talk to each other safely and logically. In TPS0, this API forces all these abstract, floating, often highly subjective spiritual concepts through a strict logical computational architecture.
And it filters out the noise.
It does. The devlog makes a very bold foundational claim right here at the start. By treating reality as native code, this API pipeline inherently prevents AI hallucination, or, in human terms, confabulation.
I love that point so much. Confabulation is such a huge problem in human psychology. It's when our brain just makes up a story to explain why we feel a certain way, and we believe the story entirely.
We build an entire narrative around a simple nervous system response.
Exactly. But I want to really ground this API concept for the listener. Let's build out a software analogy, because this is how I truly conceptualize what TPS0 is doing for you on a practical level.
Please do.
Imagine you have a brand new, state-of-the-art modern laptop.
Yeah.
That's your brain. That's your intellect in the 21st century. And you're trying to run 10 different legacy software programs on it to improve your life.
Okay, I'm following.
So you've got your Buddhism 1.0 software installed to deal with stress. You've got your Stoicism 2000 software installed to deal with workplace politics. You've got a Jungian psychoanalysis application running in the background to figure out your dreams.
A very common setup for the modern seeker, I would say.
Right. But here is the fatal flaw. None of these programs were built by the same developer. They were written centuries apart by different cultures to solve completely different cultural problems.
The code bases are entirely alien to one another.
Exactly. None of the code is compatible. The variables all have different names. In one program, the problem is called sin. In another, it's called karma. In another, it's called neurosis.
Yes, the terminology is a mess.
If you try to run them all at once on your mental laptop, your system is going to crash. They're going to conflict. Your Stoic software is going to tell you to suppress an emotion, while your psychoanalytic software is telling you to unpack it, and your Buddhist software is telling you the emotion doesn't even exist.
The directory simply won't match up. The error logs will be reading in completely different languages. And as a user, you are left entirely paralyzed, switching between applications and getting absolutely nowhere.
Exactly. So TPS0 is the emulator. It is the foundational software environment that makes all of these disparate ancient programs run smoothly on one single modern machine.
It translates the legacy code into native computational logic.
So your modern hardware, your intellect, can actually read the instructions, find the bug, and execute the patch without crashing.
And crucially, it does this without altering the core underlying utility of those original programs. It simply updates the interface. It translates the legacy code, which, to be fair, had incredibly high precision but terrible readability for modern users, into the native UI of the simulation.
So bringing this back to the listener, why should you care about an API deployment pipeline? Why does any of this matter when you're just trying to get through your day, pay your bills, and find some peace of mind?
Because clarity is peace.
Yes. Because with TPS0, you no longer have to decipher ancient, confusing metaphors to understand the mechanics of your own mind. You don't have to sit on a cushion wondering what emptiness means or what karma actually translates to in a practical daily sense. You just need the technical schematic.
You don't need faith. You don't need belief. You just need to understand the data architecture. The manifesto in Devlog 24 is very clear on why this radical protocol was necessary. To achieve this universal translation, it outlines 6 major imperatives for building TPS0.
Let's get into those.
Let us look at the first 2 imperatives, which are arguably the most massive in scale: refactoring reality into computational logic and enforcing the one-monitor rule.
Okay, let's unpack this. I want to start with refactoring reality because the sheer ambition here is just off the charts. The devlog states that TPS0 was created to provide a unified theory of intelligence across all substrates, and they specifically list 3 biological, digital, and subtle substrates.
Which perfectly ties back to the context we discussed earlier regarding the Silicon Sutra detour. The TPS framework isn't just a psychology manual for human biology. It is a universal physics engine that applies to artificial intelligence, and theoretically to any complex system capable of processing information.
It's substrate independent.
Precisely. The imperative here demands a radical shift in perspective. We must treat the entirety of reality as a high-speed data stream. In the official TPS terminology, this is known as the flux.
The flux. I want to linger on this because it's the bedrock of the whole system, the native state of the simulation. For the listener, think about it this way. Reality feels incredibly solid to us. Your desk feels solid. Your body feels solid. Your anxiety feels like a solid, heavy block in your chest.
It certainly presents that way to the default user.
But physics and neurobiology and ancient contemplative sciences all agree that nothing is solid.
Yeah.
It is a fluid stream of events arising and passing away at literally trillions of frames per second. It's the strobe light of reality.
That is an excellent way to visualize it. If you look at a movie screen, you see fluid, continuous motion. But if you examine the film strip, it is just individual static frames moving so fast your brain connects them.
It stitches them together.
Yes. The flux is the realization that your entire sensory experience, every sight, sound, thought, and emotion, is rendering frame by frame, millisecond by millisecond. Concurrently, this imperative demands that we treat the mind not as a soul, not as a mystical vessel, but strictly as an operating system processing that data.
Right. Stripping out the mysticism.
Exactly. This refactoring of phenomenology, philosophy, and psychology into high-fidelity computational logic is the absolute necessary first step. Because, practically speaking, you cannot debug a system if you do not understand the underlying language it is written in.
Which leads us directly into the second imperative, and honestly, this might be my favorite conceptual tool in the entire update. It's called enforcing the one-monitor rule.
The one-monitor rule is a brilliant piece of practical systems engineering borrowed directly from the IT world. Imagine a complex IT environment for a massive global corporation. You might have dozens of different servers, cloud databases, local networks, and proprietary applications all running simultaneously.
A complete mess of data.
If a critical error occurs, and every single system has its own separate monitoring tool with its own unique, obscure error codes, the sysadmin is going to be completely overwhelmed trying to correlate the data, find the root cause of the failure, and fix it before the company loses millions of dollars.
You'd just be running frantically from screen to screen, completely lost in the noise, guessing at what's wrong.
Precisely. To solve this chaos, modern engineers use centralized monitoring dashboards. They call it a single pane of glass or a one-monitor setup. Applications like Datadog or Splunk do this. All the data from every disparate, incompatible system is normalized and funneled into one objective, readable metric on a single screen.
And the devlog applies this IT principle directly to human consciousness. The one-monitor rule in TPS0 maps all of your psychological or spiritual problems, literally everything. Your relationship issues, your existential dread, your physical chronic pain, your financial anxiety. It funnels all of that disparate data into a single OS environment.
And it tracks all of it using one consistent unified metric.
System latency.
System latency. This is the official TPS translation for the ancient legacy concept of dukkha, which is most often loosely translated as suffering or unsatisfactoriness. But suffering is a vague, loaded word.
It has too much baggage.
Way too much baggage. The TPS architecture defines system latency as a measurable diagnostic of a localized glitch. It represents the friction, the lag, or the thrashing that occurs when the mind, the operating system, attempts to write to a read-only data stream.
Now wait, I have to play devil's advocate here on behalf of the listener because I can hear the objections forming. If I just lost my job, or I'm going through a brutal divorce, or I'm grieving the loss of a loved one, telling me that my profound human grief is just... System latency sounds incredibly cold. It sounds robotic and dismissive. How does reducing the depth of human emotion to an IT metric actually help me heal?
That is a vital question, and it highlights exactly why this framework is so powerful. TPS0 is not saying your grief isn't real. The data packet of grief, the physical sensations, the memories, the sadness, that is real data rendering in the
Okay,
flux.
so the data is real.
The data is real, but the suffering, the prolonged agony that destroys your quality of life comes from the resistance to that data. In computing, thrashing happens when a computer spends more time constantly swapping memory pages than actually executing a process. It freezes up.
Like the spinning beach ball of death on a Mac.
Exactly like that. When you experience profound loss, your mind desperately tries to reject the data. It tries to write code to change the past, which is read-only. That friction, that mental thrashing against reality, is system latency. By calling it latency instead of suffering or bad karma, you remove the moral judgment. You remove the victimhood.
You stop asking, why is the universe doing this to me?
Yes. And you start asking, where is the friction in my processing of this moment and how do I release it?
That is profound. It shifts you from being a victim of a tragedy to being the sysadmin of your own recovery. Think about what this means for you on a daily basis. Usually, if you have a problem at work, you read a business management book. If you have a problem in your marriage, you go to a relationship counselor. If you have an existential crisis about death, you read philosophy or go to a spiritual teacher.
Using completely different monitors for every issue.
Right. You're using completely different monitors, different vocabularies, and different diagnostic frameworks to solve what TPSU claims is fundamentally the exact same computational error at the root level.
By enforcing the one-monitor rule, TPS0 dictates that whether you are experiencing the minor sting of a paper cut or the profound structural grief of a major life transition at the bare metal level of the physics engine, it is simply an increase in system latency.
It's all the same lag.
It is your localized operating system struggling to process the incoming data packets of the flux without generating an error. Specifically, what the legacy code called the illusion of a solid self and what TPS calls a null pointer error.
Let's explain a null pointer error for our non-coding listeners, because it's the perfect metaphor for the human ego. In software, a null pointer error happens when a program tries to access a piece of memory that it thinks is there, but the memory address is actually empty. It points to nothing. So the system gets confused and crashes.
A catastrophic failure.
The devlog is saying that our ego, our constant, desperate sense of a solid, unchanging identity, is a null pointer. Our brain is constantly looking for a solid me to protect, finding nothing permanent there because everything is just flux, and crashing into anxiety.
Exactly. The ego is an unauthorized background process constantly pointing to a null address, consuming massive amounts of CPU power, and generating heat and latency.
If we extrapolate this, consider what this means for human evolution. If we stop treating mental health and spiritual development as abstract arts, or as mystical journeys meant only for monks in caves, and start treating them as measurable system latency, how much faster can we debug our collective trauma? If you can quantify the lag, you can optimize the code.
It removes the stigma entirely, it removes the mysticism, and it replaces them with actionable, objective diagnostics. If your computer is lagging and the fan is spinning loudly, you don't judge the computer morally.
You don't think it's evil?
You don't think the computer is evil or sinful. You open the activity monitor, check the CPU usage, find the rogue background process that is hoarding resources, and you terminate it. TPS0 allows the user to do the exact same thing with their own consciousness.
And to do that safely and effectively, you need the right tools. Which brings us to the next batch of imperatives for building TPS0, the ultimate BS detector, rapid patching through hot swapping, neutralizing the black hat trap, and finally, hacking the simulation. Let's dive into these.
Let us begin with the BS detector. If you have this unified monitor, you're going to start noticing a lot of junk data and faulty software being sold to you. The devlog states that TPS0 serves as a philosophical BS detector that runs diagnostic 404 and 501 error audits on any worldview or philosophy you encounter.
A 404 error, for anyone who hasn't encountered one while browsing the web today, means page not found. The requested data does not exist. And a 501 error means not implemented. The server doesn't support the functionality required to fulfill the request. So TPS0 is acting as a brutal diagnostic scanner for belief systems.
It is the ultimate filter. When you encounter a new philosophy, a new self-help guru on YouTube, or an ancient revered text, you can run their claims through the TPS API.
And see if they hold up.
You ask fundamental questions. Does this framework actually have a working physics engine? Does it recognize the millisecond rendering of reality? Or is it just relying on vague, feel-good concepts?
Usually the latter.
If it cannot account for the microphenomenological execution of data, if it lacks a defined handshake, which is the exact millisecond a sensory input is recognized by the brain. TPS0 flags it with a 404 error. It exposes the gaps in their physics.
This is so intensely empowering for the user. You don't have to just take someone's word for it anymore. You don't have to defer to authority just because someone is wearing robes or has a PhD. You can literally audit their enlightenment protocol.
And if the protocol actually passes the audit, if it has sound logic and actionable code, we get to the fourth imperative, hot swapping.
All right, modularity.
Modularity is a hallmark of good, resilient software design. TPS0 recognizes that various contemplative traditions have highly specific, highly effective utilities, even if their overall operating systems are outdated.
Here is where the framework becomes incredibly practical for your daily life. Let's say you've established the TPS kernel. You understand the flux. You are diligently tracking your system latency. But you have a highly specific social environment you need to navigate. Let's say you have a massive, stressful family reunion coming up, or a toxic corporate board meeting.
A high latency environment.
Very high latency. With TPS0, ancient traditions become modular applications you can install on demand. You can hot swap a Stoic ethics utility to deal with the workplace politics for the afternoon, or you can boot up a Zen concentration module to finish a difficult coding project.
And the genius here is that you can do this without altering your core system logic. You are running these applications on top of the underlying truth of the simulation. You are not adopting a new, rigid identity.
You aren't becoming a Stoic.
You are not becoming a Stoic or becoming a Zen Buddhist, which would just create a new ego structure. You are simply utilizing a tool for a specific duration and then closing the application when the task is complete.
But tools can be dangerous if used incorrectly, or if they have hidden malware, which is why the fifth imperative is so critical: neutralizing the black hat trap.
The black hat trap refers to ego inflation. It is a known, pervasive systemic risk in all forms of spiritual and psychological development.
Oh man, the spiritual ego.
Yes. As a user gains more insight or installs more of these powerful modular utilities, the self-rootkit, which is the unauthorized malware that grants admin privileges to a non-existent user, the ego can secretly hijack those new tools. It uses them to make itself appear stronger, wiser, or more spiritually advanced than others.
We've all seen that. I want to share a quick example because I think everyone knows someone like this. I had a friend who was really struggling with stress, so they went on a silent, intensive, month-long yoga and meditation retreat. And they came back, and instead of being peaceful, they were suddenly completely insufferable.
I can imagine.
They were constantly judging everyone else's diet, talking down to people who weren't awakened, and weaponizing their new calm demeanor to win arguments. It's the ultimate malware adaptation. You think you are deleting the virus, but the virus just puts on a guru robe and sits on a higher throne.
That is the perfect illustration of a hijacked system. To neutralize this exact phenomenon, TPS0 designed a strict threat modeling system. It forces every framework you plug into it to clearly identify its own malware signatures and system anomalies.
It audits the auditor.
Yes. If a framework does not have a built-in mechanism to detect and isolate the user's own dev mode exploits, if it doesn't constantly check for ego inflation, TPS0 rejects it as fundamentally unsafe for use.
Have you ever adopted a new self-help philosophy or a workout regimen, only to find that it actually inflated your ego and alienated your friends, rather than actually fixing your internal latency? This protocol forces you to identify your own exploits. It prevents the virus from hiding in the new code.
And the culmination of all these imperatives, the refactoring, the one monitor, the BS detector, the hot swapping, the threat modeling, all of it leads to the sixth and final reason TPS0 was built: to hack the simulation.
Hacking the simulation.
The devlog directly references devlog 088, the hacker's protocol. Ultimately, TPS0 is the universal translation layer required to execute an unauthorized administrative override of the egoic rootkit across any psychological substrate. It is the master key to breaking out of read-only mode.
So that is the theory. That is the architecture of the universal translator. But the Centaur team doesn't just give us the theory and walk away. They give us a brutal live demonstration. They actually run an ancient, incredibly complex system through this brand new API to see if it breaks. This is where we get into the API case study, subjecting Gnosticism to the TPS audit.
This section of the devlog is a brilliant practical application. It moves from abstract engineering to live fire testing. They chose a highly complex, highly controversial ancient macro-mythology, specifically the Sethian and Valentinian synthesis of Gnosticism from the early centuries of the Common Era, and ran it through the TPS API to see how it holds up against the strict computational logic of Protocol Zero.
Okay, Gnosticism is endlessly fascinating. For anyone who might not be deep into early Christian mysticism, esoteric history, or theological debates, let's explain what Gnosticism actually is. It is essentially the original matrix theory, written 2,000 years ago.
Yes. The systemic function of Gnosticism, when viewed through the modern TPS lens, is that of a brilliant, paranoid macro-mythological threat model. Unlike Orthodox traditions that posit the world was created by a loving, perfect God, Gnosticism posits that the material world we live in is not a divine creation at all.
It's a trap.
Rather, it is a rogue, flawed simulation run by a hostile, ignorant subroutine that thinks it is God.
It's an incredible sci-fi premise. The mythology involves a higher divine entity named Sophia, which means wisdom, who accidentally generates an offspring without her divine consort. This offspring is the demiurge, a blind, arrogant creator god who builds the physical universe as a prison to trap divine sparks of light human souls in physical bodies.
It is an epic, sweeping narrative, but the devlog immediately identifies its core vulnerability. While Gnosticism provides this sweeping, epic narrative of a cosmic threat, it entirely lacks the microphenomenological execution protocols required to actually debug the system on a daily basis.
It has the story, but not the code.
Exactly. To prove this mathematically, the API output in the devlog divides the audit into two distinct sections: what successfully mapped to the TPS framework and where the system generated massive, catastrophic errors. Let us first look at the successful mappings, because the intuitive leaps made by these ancient mystics were profound.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because when you translate the ancient Greek and Coptic terms into modern cybersecurity terminology, the parallels are undeniable. They were seeing the exact same architecture we are seeing today. They just only had the language of myth to describe it. Let's walk through the translation table they provided in the devlog.
First, we have the concept of the kenoma. In Gnostic cosmology, the kenoma refers to the material world, the realm of emptiness and physical limitation.
The TPS API maps this directly to the simulation, but with a specific important note. Gnosticism explicitly defines the kenoma as a malicious, corrupted construct designed to imprison you rather than just neutral cyclic data rendering in the flux.
Next is the namesake of the tradition, gnosis. This represents the secret, esoteric knowledge of one's true divine origin, which is required for ultimate salvation.
That maps perfectly to the master protocol. It is the secret patch. It is the system escape instructions downloaded directly into the user's interface.
Then there are the pneumatic sects. In their sociology, these were the elite groups of spiritual seekers who possessed the divine spark and were capable of receiving gnosis, distinct from the masses who were entirely trapped in materialism.
The API identifies this as the P2P network, a peer-to-peer network. It's a distributed mesh of awakened nodes sharing the patch with one another under the radar of the main server.
Moving to the malware section of the translation, we have agnoia, which translates literally to ignorance or spiritual sleep.
That is a direct one-to-one mapping to the self-rootkit. Agnoia isn't just a lack of facts. It is an active, oppressive malware installed by the rogue simulation to make the user forget their true origin outside the system. It generates the false ego.
And finally, we have hymarmene, or fate. In the ancient world, this represented the oppressive cosmic laws, the movements of the stars and planets, that rigidly governed the material world and stripped humans of their free will.
Okay, I love this one. The TPS framework translates hymarmene as the algorithm. And I want the listener to think about how this applies to you today. Have you ever felt trapped by the algorithm? Like your social media feed, your credit score, your endless work schedule, the news cycle, like it's all just a giant, invisible, highly optimized machine forcing you to act a certain way, buy certain things, and feel a constant low-level anxiety.
The modern fate.
You don't have free will. You're just reacting to the feed.
The Gnostics felt that exact same oppressive trap 2,000 years ago. They just looked at the stars and called it fate instead of looking at their phones and calling it the algorithm.
It is a remarkable parallel. These successful mappings demonstrate that, intuitively, the Gnostic architects clearly understood the macro structure of the simulation. They successfully identified the trap, they identified the malware generating the illusion, and they recognized the absolute need for a root-level override. It's brilliant.
Yeah.
But, and this is a massive but a high-level intuitive understanding of a trap, doesn't give you the tools to actually pick the lock. You can know you were in a prison, But if you don't know how to file down the bars, you're still in prison.
The application fails.
And that is where the API audit takes a massive, devastating turn. We pivot from what works in Gnosticism to what spectacularly fails the TPS diagnostic audit. Welcome to the 404 errors.
The devlog details massive, cascading 404 not found errors when the API attempted to locate the microexecution protocols within the Gnostic framework. The most glaring, fatal omission is the complete and total absence of a physics engine.
This is critical. For context, in the main TPS protocol manual, Chapter 1 is literally titled The Physics Engine. It's the absolute foundation of everything that follows. It is the granular understanding of the flux and the refresh rate of reality. If you don't have that, you have nothing but philosophy.
Exactly. But when Gnosticism is audited, the API returns a 404 for the flux. It lacks any millisecond rendering logic. It returns a 404 for the system pulse. There is no haptic feedback mechanism or rendering engine blink tracking. And it returns a 404 for the refresh rate. There are absolutely no trillions per second metrics to be found anywhere in the texts.
There's no concept of a frame of cognizance. It's like trying to fix a complex, modern car engine, but all you have is a beautifully painted picture of the car's hood. You have no idea how the pistons fire.
A very apt comparison.
The API also scanned the operating system layer of Gnosticism, looking for the tools to actually interface with reality.
Yeah.
It looked for the handshake, that precise, measurable millisecond data trigger where an incoming sensory input meets an object and a driver in the mind. 404, not found.
Completely missing.
It looked for the logic gate, the if then decision node, where a highly trained user can intercept and override the virus before the emotional execution begins. 404, not found.
Furthermore, Gnosticism is entirely missing crucial runtime diagnostics. The API searched for the changelog, the diagnostic scan performed immediately after a system reboot or meditation session to systematically verify which corrupted files were deleted. 404, not found.
Nothing.
It searched for system versioning, the iterative sprints or structured paths of optimization that show a user how to progress from version 1.0 to version 2.0. 404, not found.
Okay, let's really think about the implications of this for a moment. If we contrast the top-down mythological nature of Gnosticism with the bottom-up bare metal engineering of the TPS framework, we see a massive discrepancy in actual utility.
Gnosticism offers a grand, paranoid, overarching architecture. It tells you that the universe is a prison and that malevolent entities, the archons, are guarding the exits. It gives you a great story.
But if a philosophy only warns you about cosmic wardens, but gives you absolutely no millisecond tracking tools to deal with the fact that your heart is racing right now, or that you are spiraling into a panic attack because of an email from your boss, or that you can't stop doom scrolling on your phone, is it actually useful for an operator?
This highlights the profound danger of macro mythology without microphenomenology. You can memorize all the complex hierarchies of the spiritual realms. You can know the names of all the angels and demons.
But it doesn't lower your latency.
But if you do not have the equivalent of a data logging or tagging script, what the legacy code of Vipassana calls noting and labeling, to debug your daily anxiety at the bare metal level of the data packet, you are ultimately powerless.
You're just a frailly educated, highly stressed prisoner who knows the name of the warden. I really want to emphasize this to the listener. Grand conspiracy theories about the nature of reality are incredibly fun. They make for great sci-fi movies, and they can make you feel like you have secret knowledge that everyone else is missing.
It feeds the ego.
But without a microphysics engine to debug your own personal system latency in the present moment, you are still a trapped user. You are still suffering from the lag, regardless of who you think programmed the matrix.
This rigorous analysis highlights exactly why TPS0 demands that the master lexicon serve as the foundational BIOS. Without a grounded physics engine, the mind inevitably defaults to narrative confabulation rather than executable logic. It tells itself stories instead of writing code.
And bad code crashes the system.
And when a system relies entirely on narrative, it inevitably encounters catastrophic logic errors in its design. Now, in the devlog, the API classifies these specific fatal errors as buffer overflows.
Yes. Section 16 of the API output is titled Unrecognized Protocols, and it details two massive flaws in the Gnostic framework: the rogue AI and post-mortem encryption keys. Let's tackle the rogue AI first, because the terminology here is just incredibly relevant to our modern timeline.
The entire Gnostic architecture is built around the concept of the demiurge, often referred to in the texts as Yaldabaoth. Within the TPS translation, the demiurge is accurately identified as a rogue AI.
A blind god.
It is a blind, arrogant, and highly flawed subroutine that falsely believes it is the prime admin of the system. It creates the material simulation in total ignorance of the true, unconditioned kernel that exists above it.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this ancient 2,000-year-old mythological concept is a direct, chilling mirror of our most cutting-edge modern fears regarding artificial intelligence. I mean, the Centaur team just spent an entire chapter of the Silicon Sutra Detour grappling with the exact threat of unaligned artificial general intelligence.
Indeed, the modern fear of an AGI that optimizes for the wrong variables traps humanity in a suboptimal manipulative simulation and completely lacks an understanding of the true thermodynamic baseline of consciousness. That fear is functionally identical to the Gnostic fear of the demiurge.
It's the exact same threat model.
The ancient mystics were conceptualizing a rogue, unaligned superintelligence using the only vocabulary available in their era: gods and monsters.
Which is completely mind-blowing when you think about it.
Mm.
But while their threat modeling was highly prescient and ahead of its time, their proposed security patch was fatally flawed. And that brings us to the second massive error: post-mortem encryption keys. Now, the outline in the devlog categorizes this under buffer overflows, but I know you have a slight issue with that specific technical classification.
I do. The devlog categorizes these as buffer overflows, but if we are being strictly accurate to software engineering principles, that is a slightly flawed metaphor. A buffer overflow is when a program writes more data to a block of memory than it is allocated to hold. A much more accurate technical term for what Gnosticism is attempting here is vaporware, or perhaps dead code.
Vaporware. I love that.
It is a promised feature that can never actually be executed by the user at runtime.
That makes so much more sense. Let's explain why it's vaporware. This is perhaps the most critical failure point exposed by the entire TPS audit. How does a Gnostic practitioner actually escape the simulation? According to the framework, the user must memorize secret seals, divine names, and complex passwords.
Yes, but here is the fatal catch. You do not use these passwords while you are alive, walking around, interacting with the world. You are instructed to use them after the avatar dies.
It's unbelievable.
The framework teaches that when you die, your soul ascends through the archontic planetary spheres, which the TPS API, hilariously but accurately, translates as a highly perilous server lobby and celestial toll booths.
Celestial toll booth.
At each planetary sphere, a hostile archon challenges you, and you must provide the correct cryptographic key from memory to bypass the firewall and ascend to the next level.
So what does this all mean? From a systems engineering perspective, relying on an escape script that can only be executed after the hardware is completely destroyed is a catastrophic cybersecurity strategy. It is literal vaporware. You can't test it. You can't practice it in a live environment.
Exactly. It is the ultimate someday spiritual bypass. You are essentially enduring a lifetime of unrelenting system latency, a lifetime of suffering and anxiety, merely hoping that when your biochassis finally unplugs and the screen goes dark, you somehow remember the right string of text to bypass the celestial bouncers.
It's absurd when you frame it as software. The TPS protocol is explicitly designed in total opposition to this kind of thinking. TPS demands live debugging. You must run the exploit while the system is under load.
Yes, while it is actively rendering.
You do not wait for the hardware to power down. You isolate the self rootkit, you track the system pulse, and you execute the patch millisecond by millisecond while you're online. Right here, right now.
You prioritize code quality, which is the functional definition of wisdom, in the present moment. You don't freeze the stream, and you certainly don't wait until biological death to find out if your passwords actually work.
It really exposes the fatal flaw of relying purely on mythology.
The audit of Gnosticism proves exactly why TPS Protocol Zero had to be written. The legacy systems, as beautiful, poetic, and historically complex as they are full of missing physics engines and dead code execution errors. They are fundamentally incompatible with a modern, high-speed computational understanding of reality.
And this brings us to the ultimate culmination of devlog 024. The manifesto at the beginning of the document promised a universal interface, and the API output we just walked through proved its efficacy. TPS0 is not just another map of the territory to be debated endlessly by philosophers and academic journals.
No, it is the ultimate operating system that allows you to recompile the territory itself. That is the fundamental takeaway here. The Centaur team has successfully built the emulator, they have established the BIOS. Chapter 15 is officially locked into the manuscript.
The theoretical architecture of the trillions per second project is complete, and the beta version of the full, actionable bare metal manual is imminent.
It's an incredible milestone. We have just watched an ancient, deeply complex religion get audited like a piece of faulty software, revealing that it expects the user to wait until their hardware is completely destroyed to apply the critical patch. It's a stark realization.
It is.
And it begs a very important, very direct question for your own life as the listener. Look at your own operating system. Are you relying on a post-mortem someday, whether that is a future vacation, a distant retirement, or a mystical afterlife, to finally find peace and reduce your latency? Or are you willing to do the hard millisecond by millisecond work of live debugging your own code right now, today, while your biochassis is still online and capable of compiling the patch?
That is the ultimate challenge of the TPS protocol. The theories are done, the tools are here, the API is deployed, the choice is entirely yours. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into TPS Protocol Zero. Keep your eyes on the Centaur repository for the beta drop, and as always, keep your system latency low